And I will begin, as we always do, by acknowledging that we're meeting in Melbourne anyway, on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people. And I'd like to acknowledge them as traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging of these and all the lands on which we work and live, recognizing that sovereignty was never ceded. And I invite those of you who aren't in Melbourne to post where you are tuning in from into the chat if you would like to do so. And with that, I think that we are ready to begin in earnest. So how about, we did have Amanda on the top of the bill, but Anne or Jesse, maybe we'll begin with one or the other of you. And maybe if you're ready to go. Yeah, is that all right with you, Jesse? Okay, cool. Take it away.
Hang on, I'll just get my technology into shape. It's always a little fiddle, isn't it, to get all that happening. So can you see that okay?
Yeah, it's in presenter mode. I don't know if you want to in slideshow mode, or if you like it like that, it's fine with us, whatever you prefer.
I wonder if I can do it like that. No, unfortunately, I've thought it would show like that, and I've got my speaker notes underneath. So
yeah, that's fine. I mean, we don't mind.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Go for it.
So you'll see the whole thing, unfortunately. But anyway, there we go. I'd also like to acknowledge the, I'm just got to move this little, there we go. Start by acknowledging the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, on whose unceded land I prepared this presentation and the study on which it's based. The image of two bubbles connecting is a shimmering place of intersection. I know this place as the shimmer, my lived embodied experience of connection. I'm a poet and essayist, and this is the experience I have which precedes all my writing. It's a kind of excitement, a bodily and psychic flutter that there is something live happening, or offered, or possible, a potential. It's my surest telltale that I have something to explore in writing. The etymology of the word shimmer is Old English from the word Sumerian, to glitter or glisten. It's a word which partakes of two different dimensions, for instance, the visual and the kinesthetic. Light shimmers on water or hazes in the distance. Environmental educationalist Karen Malone writes, quote, "Shimmer encompasses light, cell vibrations, molecular vibrations, and a potentiality," end quote. It's an apt word for connection, whereby two different entities or energies come into contact, and occurs for me at the meeting of art forms, poetry and prose, ideas, fields, feminism and synchronicity, for example, and approaches, creative and critical. The shimmer is generated both in the real material world and also in the metaphoric realm. One of the community of practitioners I have around me in the shimmer place, it is poet and theorist Kim Adonizio, who says that, quote, "Metaphor, from the Greek metaphora, transference, speaks of one thing in terms of another, creating a kind of energy field, what I think of as the shimmer." Virginia Woolf seemed to experience something akin to this shimmer. She describes it in connection with her intense relationship with Vita Sackville-West and writes, quote, "And all the doors opening, and this is, I believe, the moth shaking its wings in me." Sometimes it's like this for me too, a sensation in my chest, a kind of thrumming. It feels insect-like, like crickets rubbing their legs in me. Here's a poem I wrote about the community of practice theorists who help inform my own notion of shimmer, and it's called Shimmer Methodology. Virginia's moth shakes its wings in me. Claude's water lilies waver on the border of the infinite in me. Kim's energy field of the metaphor vibrates in me. Sylvia's minor light still gleams incandescent in me. Deborah's world, not of cogs and gears, but relations and pulses, alive in me. Maggie's glowing data, not just in the data, but not just in me either, resonates in me. Intermingling of like and unlike in me. Light of life and dark of extinction in me. Paul's shimmering beneath in me. I experienced the shimmer of connection each time I found one of these theorists referred to shimmering and explain the meaning it had in their own particular domain. One of these is ethnographer, the late Deborah Bird-Rose. Bird-Rose worked with the Olney people for over 30 years, and she writes, quote, "The term biryan, translated from Yolngu as brilliant or shimmering, which does not distinguish between domains of nature and culture, is characteristic of a lively, pulsating world, not a mechanistic one," end quote. Bird-Rose goes on to say, quote, "And that motion, that biryan, that shimmer, that brilliance, people say, is your actual capacity to see and experience ancestral power." Without claiming anything of this for myself, Bird-Rose's words provide a way of connecting to an Indigenous perspective of shimmer, deepening and grounding my own perspective, allowing me to broaden the notion of shimmer beyond Anglo-Saxon references. French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty did not use the word shimmer as far as I know, but his work on perception also informs my notion of the shimmer. He took the view that, quote, "the event of perception unfolds as a reciprocal exchange between the living body and the animate world that surrounds it," end quote. My perception of shimmer is of this reciprocal exchange. I receive and the other entity gives, emits energy, intensity, or to borrow from botany, lures. Isabel Stenger's term for this is reciprocal capture, seen in botanical dyads such as orchid and wasp, the orchid putting out visual lures to entice the wasp to pollinate. I'd like to suggest that this notion of reciprocal capture also works metaphorically for cultural artefacts, such as academic papers, symposium presentations, or poems and lyric essays, where enticing titles and well put together arguments or metaphors and imagery are designed to attract readers, and writers are motivated to spread their ideas afield. Shimmer is a lived experience of embodied knowing, recognising the way body and brain are intertwined. Thinking with new materialist Rosie Braidotti and her notion of nomadic thought, which, quote, "stresses the idea of embodiment and the embodied and embedded material structure of what we commonly call thinking, the embodiment of the mind and the embrainment of the body are a more apt formulation for nomadic thought than Cartesian or other forms of dualism. The notion of embodiment of the mind has become more common over recent decades, but Marx's coining of the term embrainment of the body points to a bodily intelligence that counters the dualism which devalues the soma. The shimmer is the co-arising in me of bodily and mental reactions to a connection having been made. They are inseparable, but maybe more than that, the bodily reaction, the insect rubbing its legs in me, the bodily radar that registers in me, is often what I experience first. A somatic reaction lets me know that there is something to be explored mentally, cognitively, and textually. Shimmer sounds gentle, a kind of genteel, perhaps romanticised affect. But the shimmer often occurs for me in bodily psychic collision, impact, and intensity. It can be difficult to withstand the force of ideas impacting other ideas. I see my task as a creative writer to translate this intensity into my words on the page, so that when the reader comes to open that book or read that poem, some measure of this intensity is available to them. Braidotti writes of, quote, using the text as a transformer or vector of intensity that conveys your relationship to the outside world. Poetry is an art form particularly suited to the rendering of intensity of experience into words on the page. Compression of language and ideas are important drivers of the art of poetics. Others have also written and thought about how intensity gets packed into a piece of writing. The other Anne Carson, the Canadian poet and classic scholar, writes, quote, a poem, when it works, is an action of the mind captured on a page, and the reader has to enter into that action. His mind repeats that action and travels again through the action. But it's a movement of yourself through a thought, through an activity of thinking. So by the time you get to the end, you're different than you were at the beginning, and you feel that difference. Of course, the reader also brings their own reactions, histories, associations to the poem, but they also follow the breadcrumbs the poet has left for them. The reader repeats the action of the poet, as Carson writes, through unfolding the thoughts the poet had in the act of composition. In this sense, a poem is like a concertina, and reading a poem when it works is such that the concertina opens and the thinking, feeling that went into the poem can be accessed by the reader. Borrowing again from Stengers, I suggest that intensity is one of the lures which can work to capture a reader and set up the possibility of reciprocal capture. Creative writers predispose themselves to being inspired by multitudinous means. Mine is by bringing a certain attentiveness, honed by meditation, to daily life. Braidotti writes of needing, quote, a seemingly absent-minded floating attention or a fluid sensibility that is porous to the outside and which our culture has coded as feminine. This is a similar state to reverie, one of the mind states said to generate poetry composition. I'd like to finish with a poem from the creative sequence of my PhD in process. Georgia Sand is one of the women I'm writing poetic biographies about. She was a 19th century French novelist and socially, romantically, and sexually transgressive. There were many intensities I wanted to pack into this poem, starting with the shimmer I experienced on seeing this dagger in the Musée de la Vie Romantique in Paris, after reading beforehand that Sand had worn the dagger for protection when she roamed the Parisian streets, as well as on her first flirty meeting with the poet Alfred de Musset, who quickly became her lover. I wanted to pack the poem with eros, taking advantage of obvious phallic possibilities. Georgia Sand's dagger, the feel of power in my hand. I wonder, have I the nerve? It warms in my clasp, inspires confidence in lanes and byways. When I first meet de Musset, he devours me with his eyes, spies at dangling from my cummerbund. Flushed with flirting at soiree end, the dagger is swallowed by my skirt's dark folds. To conclude, I cannot control when or where the shimmer happens. What I can do is predispose myself to its happening by being attentive to my own flickers of connection. Once it happens, I can play with how I render this in words, packing intensity into the words and stanzas and the shaping of the poem on the page. I hope the poem comes alive for possible readers, perhaps shimmers for them, acting as a lure, and even, hopefully, facilitating a reciprocal capture. Thank you very much for listening and for the opportunity.
Oh, that's terrific, Anne. Just beautiful. Just beautiful.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Oh.
What I might propose we do is we'll maybe hear all of the presentations, and I'm hopeful Amanda will still be joining us. But maybe we'll hear next from Jessie, and then we'll hang out and have a chat, and we'll hear from Amanda when she arrives. So Jessie, would you mind stepping in?
All right, thank you so much. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I won't be sharing my screen. Well, first about me. So I am a third-year PhD student at Bowling Green State University, and my areas of study are in interpersonal communication, non-normative relationships, and the impact of religion on non-normative relationships. And that comes out of connections that I've been building since 2016 with the election of Donald Trump. Increasingly, the communities around me in my immediate environment began to feel more alien and hostile, and less a place where I was confident that I could find support for people who share my experience and my identities and relationships. And online communities began to become a lifeline for me. Particularly, I gravitated toward Twitter at that time, as well as sub-communities on Facebook. And I bring this up because my response to the prompt was inspired by the ongoing juxtaposition of that growing experience of online communities and spaces with my memory of Sherry Turkle's assessment of online spaces at the point of time where they were in 2011 in her book, Alone Together, an image that has increasingly or seems to have a lingering impact on public debate over the value of internet spaces and online technology. In Turkle's text, community, she emphasizes community as proximity and practical daily help, which she at one point discusses as having been obscured by the ongoing treatment and talk of online spaces as community. And this, the memory of this has increasingly seemed to be contrasted with my growing experiences of online spaces as a lifeline and the shared experience of others who are exploring sexuality and gender identity, as well as experiences of surviving religious trauma in often insular white evangelical environments and backgrounds. And the sense that the communities in our immediate physical environment do not understand and cannot support those experiences and bring the healing that we need. What has increasingly become apparent to me since COVID-19 hit, and since we have lost the immediate and ready access to face-to-face connection, is that more and more it seems like the possibilities of what I think of in contrast to communities of proximity, of communities of affinity, have seemed to have jumped to the fore for many people. And I've, like many people, I have frequently turned to TikTok and to these fun short videos that people share on that platform to pass the time, to spread some serotonin and peace, as well as to support each other in similar experiences for which I found support on Twitter 4 years earlier. These online connections not only appear for many of my friends and myself to have led to increasing opportunities for self-discovery and relationship building that would not have been possible in our immediate environment, but also has translated into real life community in ways that I don't think would have been possible in 2011 in the same way, at least not for me at the time. This has really sort of come to the forefront for me in a recent interaction, or rather a kind of pile-on Twitter, which happens occasionally when someone tweets something that is controversial, and many people reply and really end up boosting the original message, but also piling on with their own response. What happened recently was a user tweeted something that felt like it came out of the mid-2000s, said, "You should not meet people that you have met online in person because you don't know anything about them and they could be anyone," which immediately struck me as a sentiment that would have made a lot of sense when I was growing up and when I was attending college, but that doesn't really make much sense to me anymore. And many people, particularly many of my friends who I've made over the past 4 years, have replied with images of the friends that they have met in person, that they met online, images of romantic partners that they have now moved in with or married, that they met online, some of which they met during the pandemic. And increasingly, this image to me stands in contrast to the way that Turkle saw and interpreted her findings 10 years ago. Where this has led me to is a sense not that Turkle's findings are irrelevant or that they should be dismissed, but that the present moment, to capture that one aspect of the prompt, what holds your attention in this present moment, what holds my attention is how since we have turned toward the internet and started clinging or desperately seeking in the internet community that we have lost face to face, there's a tendency to speak negatively of the present experience, but I think it is an optimal moment to consider the possibilities that that are often minimized in discussions of online community and technology, particularly the possibilities offered by communities of affinity for genuine human connection and dialogue and constructive identity work, as well as the risks that they pose in terms of creating new forms of isolation and new forms of alienation and conflict. And that's what I have.
Thank you so much. I've just jumped in from stream 3 because Stacey had to pop out. And so I've only heard the last minute, but I'm sure that we had 2 beautiful presentations here. So I'm just wondering, before we go to question and answer, if we have Amanda has arrived yet. Doesn't
Yes,
look.
I'm here.
Amanda, you're here. Are you
I'm so
ready to
sorry
present?
I'm late.
That's absolutely fine.
Yes, yes, I can be ready.
Wonderful. We'd love to hear from you. So I will just pin you. Oh, actually, I don't have that capability, but I will mute myself and please take it away.
And sorry, yes, that's my dog in the background who's very excited to be here as well. But yeah, that's the way things go. So just one second. Okay. Yeah, just 2020 life, right? So when I was in the space of responding to this prompt, I'm in my second year of coursework for my PhD program with Jessie. And I was in a course taught by Dr. Sandra Faulkner, who some of you might know, and it was a relational course, relational interpersonal communication. And if anyone is familiar with Dr. Faulkner's scholarship, she's looks at poetic inquiry quite a bit. And so that was one of the focuses of our course together. We did this really awesome project where we got to do some interviews and then based on those interviews, create a poetic portrait for the participant. So that was kind of the space I was in when I was responding to this prompt. So instead of responding in prose, I chose to respond in a poem. And I was very inspired by the rainbow in the bubble. I think a lot of us have maybe been in our second year of coursework. It was in a PhD program, but I came in right in the heart of the pandemic and was feeling quite siloed at times, and not having met anyone face to face. It was all Zoom. We all lived that life. So that was kind of the space I was in. So the rainbow really inspired me to think in terms of vibrance and color and to respond where we can, create life from. So I guess with that said, I'll just, if it's okay, perform my poem. And yeah, I know it's not the full 15 minutes, but it is 9:30 p.m. here and it's almost my bedtime. So I'll go ahead and perform that. So the title is Poetry is My Rainbow. Red is for writing bleeding words onto a page. Orange pen in hand, yellow rays of sun, spill from the blue glass to the desk. Spill paper with green lines, the poetry flows. My feelings are given breath. Violet notebook top, indigo ink. This is my experience written as a poem. One thing I will, thank you. One thing I will mention is what Dr. Faulkner has said, is that all art is a call to action. So I really, that kind of emphasized this poem is that thinking of it as a call to action, being, for me, the breath part was really, really important to not only take our scholarship, whether it's critical ethnography or whatever it might be, but think about how it's a call to action to breathe life into experiences like mine when I was feeling siloed as a PhD student. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It was a very beautiful poem, and I think that's something that we're all thinking about, is how our art and now our work is a call to action. So I think that would resonate with all of us. We've got a small group here, which is actually quite lovely. So rather than writing questions perhaps or comments in the chat, if people would like to just can unmute and pop in with any questions or any comments about the 3 presentations we had from Anne or Jessie or Amanda, that would be lovely.
Can I just, Jessie, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is TikTok and how you make that work, because there seems to be, you know, they're collecting a lot of data on you when you use TikTok. And I'm just thinking about, you know, how you use TikTok, because obviously it is a good way to connect.
I'm sorry, so you're asking me personally about how I use TikTok?
About TikTok and how you use it. Sorry if I'm not clear. It's
no.
11:30 here in Melbourne, but we've been in lockdown for a long time.
No problem. I mean, TikTok is an extremely algorithm-driven platform. You can't really, you cannot easily find videos by searching. Everything is, it's short, less than a minute, often less than 10-second videos and you simply scroll up when one video has finished, and it automatically feeds you something that it thinks you will like next. So it tracks what you look at, how long you watch it, what you like. It does gather a lot of information on your viewing habits in order to provide you and connect you with people and content that it thinks that's going to appeal to you. And more than one person has found out that the algorithm discovered that they were lesbian or bisexual before they knew it, because it began feeding them that content within their first 10 minutes on the app. And so for myself personally, I largely, I largely end up either on, because I mostly seek that serotonin boost, I mostly end up on animal rescue TikTok, as well as queer community TikTok. I've been like less and less spending my time on content from religious trauma survivors, because that only really works for so long. But yeah, on both a personal and a general level, yeah, that's sort of been my experience. Unfortunately, in order to make the or in order to get the both the connection and the positive engagement that you're looking for on the app, I found you largely have to bracket and ignore that issue of what data they're gathering on you and how that and the long-term impact of that. Unfortunately, that's largely the reality of using social media spaces.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Ingrid.
Hi, I'm from Auckland, New Zealand. We're in our 4th lockdown. And when I started my PhD was before the COVID. And then in between, that, the world is changed totally. But then I really found that online connections, as Jessie said, that online relationship, online community, online connections actually become my new data. And I found it's become really, really useful. And I already finished my PhD. I already hand in, but we're still in lockdown, and the students can't keep going. So I think that's our new way to look at how we interact to the world, how we to get our embodied experience through these online connections. Myself is a psychotherapist, and through lockdown, I work in my research, but also I support my clients. And all my clients say, I'm so thankful you're here. But through my own writing, through my own PhD research, I found that the connection to these people vulnerable, how much I learn, how much I gain, how much I grow as a person, as an autoethnographer researcher. And they probably don't realize how much they gave to me, I gain from them. And so the only thing I think for that COVID is the open window for me to see the world in different way. You know, for my clients, we usually see each other in the session rooms, because online we are into their personal room, their living room, their garden, and we connect the world. It's so totally different world now. But just thank you, Jessie, for sharing that. I just wanted to share a little bit of my experience in that.
I think that's so beautifully expressed, Ingrid, and your work is marvellous. And I was just thinking, I always listen to these presentations and think about how do they join up in the moment. And I've sort of been writing a few notes. And I was thinking about it's a type of community capacity building, a bit like what Ingrid's saying, but like I feel that people are calling on like a community of thoughts and theories that are coalescing through sort of lived experience and theoretical insights, and your beautiful work on the shimmer and then Jessie talking about building proximity. And I felt, Amanda, like you're building relationships, like feeling, you know, there's intimacy coming in. And then Jessie, you talked about serotonin uplifts. And to me, they all just kind of weave together with a similar sensibility, actually. I found it very sort of uplifting. And I also noticed that the way everyone presented was really slow and peaceful. And I don't know if it just was very nice to give the space in between the thoughts. Yeah.
I have a question for Anne and Amanda about the using poetry. You know, we're using poetic inquiry in our research. I'm curious how you incorporate that art form, poetry or poetic exploration into your research.
Will I start, maybe? Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you very much. It's been fascinating to observe what's happened to my poetry by doing a PhD. I am previously published, so I have a very solid poetic practice, and I've written poetic biography before. And I suppose I was a bit worried when I started my PhD that maybe shining the light of critical sort of analysis on my creative process might make it evaporate. But it hasn't actually, and it's sort of morphed in all sorts of ways. And the most recent morph has been into engagement with theory. Previously, I would write about, I suppose, mostly lyric poems about people and environment and embeddedness and interactions between people and environment. And more recently, I've found that my poetry has sort of its own accord, started to reflect the theoretical frame that I'm bringing to my work. And so that poem that I read, the one about shimmer methodology, is one of those, finding a way to, in that case, express communities of practice and how dependent we are on all the theorists who feed us and nurture us and assist us in our thinking. And Virginia Woolf talks about thinking in common, and I really like that. We think in common, obviously, at events like this, but through all the books and articles that we read who help us shape. And I suppose, in a way, reading all that stuff gets embedded somehow deep inside, and there's still a mystery of how a poem is formed. And I love that mystery, and I don't want to do anything to that mystery. But I have noticed now, as I said, that those sort of theoretical engagements are beginning to be reflected in a poetic form, and I find that incredibly pleasing, and I feel like it just gives my poetics, broadens out my poetics.
Beautiful.
If I could say a little bit about poetry too, because that's something that I do in my research. For me, my poetry that I write, I can say things that wouldn't be possible by just using prose. My project is, I've written a ceremony of restoration, and that's about lived experience of myself, of loss and trauma, but it's also speaking to people about loss and trauma. So with poetry, you can create that space for people to go with that poetry and listen to themselves. And so that's how I use my poetry. But there's so many other things you can do with poetry. Recently, I was involved in a project about groundwater in the Melbourne area. And so I was able to write poetry to say things that were confrontational, but also there was a lyricism about the poetry. So in a way I could get away with it, but saying things that really made people think about it. I just love poetry. That's where I'm coming from.
It is a wonderful art form. I wonder, Amanda, for you, what does sort of the question that Ingrid asked about what opportunity or what advantage or affordance does poetry for you bring to your inquiry?
Oh, I was going to do a yes and to both what you and, is it Carrie?
Carrie, yeah.
Carrie, okay. I'm like the queen of mispronouncing names. But I'm glad but I was going to do a yes and because so I'm an experienced scholar, I guess, trying to get that published in. But I have taken this course with Dr. Faulkner, and I also submitted a series of poems to our Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies department for a colloquium they were doing. And like what Carrie was saying, I think poetry offers a space that prose don't allow. For me, I found it intrinsic I found it very healing to write in poems, and it's something I had never considered before. I wrote some pieces on, I don't know if Jesse, you were talking about this, but about religious trauma that growing up, and kind of that line between nostalgia that my religious organization still holds for me, and then also the oppression that it still holds over me. And I found that writing in poetry really allowed breath and space. And I hope to continue that in my future scholarship of allowing my participants the option of writing a poem after. So that's kind of a project I've been starting to conceptualize, is how can I also allow participants the same breath that I was given through poetry. So
I love that, sort of pinpointing the breath and space that the poetry brings. And I think part of that is because it's lineated, it doesn't go to the end of the line. So when you read it, when you write it, there's a pause there. And it's really interesting to me that there's this sort of paradoxical or something relationship between the breath and the space, but also the intensity and they work beautifully and synergistically together, because I think one of the things about poetry is often the intensity of personal experience or subjective reactions or emotion or bodily reactions that go into the poem, as there was in your beautiful poem. And I love the way that those two sort of riff off each other.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to add one thing I found my experience with my poetry in my own research. Because I'm immigrant, I have a different culture background. So I tried to write about my view about my home country, which is China. And I included one story as I visited China. But, you know, as autobiography, we need to be honest. But with political fear, it's really hard to include the honest story in the writing, especially this writing needed to be published. And I'm so worried this writing will cause myself trouble one day. You know? So I actually used the poetry, write a whole chapter about my experience back to China, use metaphor to talk about these things I want to express, but without really saying it. That's what I feeling, how that poetry give me that safety shelter. That's something, yeah, that's what
Yeah, there's an indirection, isn't there? I think the poet, beautiful poet Jane Hirschfield, talks about the poetry of indirection, and there's lots of affordances in that, like political safety.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very moving, actually. Thanks for sharing that.
Carrie, did you have a point you'd like to make?
I was just talking about how poetry has come to mean so much to me. I always knew I could write poetry, but since I've been doing my research, it's really come to the fore, and it's really pushed itself into my research. You never know where you're going to go with research. You think you're going one way and then you're going another way. But the thing that I also find, because I'm a musician and a singer, the rhythm of poetry, you know, like some people think it's about rhyme. It's not about rhyme. It's actually about having rhythm in your poetry. And, you know, Anne did that so beautifully in her poems when she was doing her presentation. And Amanda, that was lovely, your poetry too. So what I'm saying is keep going and let that part of you, that creative part of you out to play, to sing, and to have that rhythm.
Catherine's just written in the chat here, the performativity of poetry. Yeah, absolutely. And with that rhythm and breath that Amanda was talking about comes that embodied experience so much that it's very difficult to get with other forms of writing. And also that pace that we were talking about, how this session has felt like a slower, calmer journey, really. I think that comes also from that poetic presentation.
Yes, it's funny, isn't it? When you write a poem too, I don't know about other people, but I do know that lots of my colleagues feel the same, that you have to speak it out loud. You can't just, you know, writing on the page is one thing, and maybe that's the first important sort of birth of it, but then to bring it into life, you really have to speak it out loud and articulate those syllables and get the play of the consonants against the vowels and the internal rhymes and all those sound qualities that are so important. I think it was Liz this morning who was talking about honouring the words. And I was thinking then that poetry is one of the art forms that really does honour the sentience of the words. And they're so important because there are usually fewer of them than prose. Everyone is carefully chosen and weighed up. You know, I mean, I know all writers do that, but the focus on that in poetry is really acute. Yeah, someone's just talked about Matthew Zapruder there. He's really wonderful. Yeah, and Jess Wilkinson.
Yeah, Catherine's actually something you were relating to what you're talking about here, and Catherine's actually put in a question in the chat about in terms of your creative processes. So this would be for all of the poets here. Do you find yourself speaking them as you're writing? Like, what's your process? Is it that more internal monologue, or is it something you're speaking out loud as you're writing?
So the beginning for me definitely is the intimacy of the page and the privacy of the page. But at some point I start to sort of mumble it under my breath, just to sort of feel it in my mouth, like feeling the words in my mouth is really important to me, and sort of tasting them and feeling viscerally in my mouth the shape of them, you know, like banana, you know, banana, just sort of feeling what the lips do, feeling what the tongue does. And then eventually it's reading it out loud as if I'm performing it. And that's the sort of apotheosis of it. But I go through those processes many, many times to test them and hone them and, you know, see if it's all right. And then reading it to a group is another sort of, like, that's my private process. But I do feel that poems need to be read aloud. And so the opportunity to read some of my work to a group is always really valued for that reason, because the listening, you sort of feel the quality of people's listening as a performer, and you have a radar that's very honed to that, and you can really tell. I'm sure everyone who has done some performance knows this. You can really tell the quality of the listening, and it helps somehow. It helps the poem come into itself because it's sort of received, it's landed. So that's a very interesting part of the process as well.
Thank you for that. I wonder, Amanda, would you like to, we've only got a few minutes, if you'd like to add in your process and experience?
Well, my dog's choosing to bark at this moment.
That's part of it too, I'm sure.
Yeah. So during our my exposure to poetry writing has been quite limited, but during our course, we were introduced to several types of forms of poetry. So like, for example, the skinny poem, which I found very interesting, and then a few others, but I've been finding that, so I do tend to think in more like pragmatic senses. Sometimes creativity is very difficult for me. I remember as a child, like my friends wanted to do scrapbooking a lot, and it stressed me the fuck out. Like they put all these things in front of me, and I was like, I don't know, my brain couldn't. Even walking into, I don't know if you have the same shops there, but like Michael's or Joann Fabrics, I mean, it's like these craft stores. I got really overwhelmed quickly. So having the kind of, the structure is where I like to start in my process of how I feeling like this poem is going to make sense for me from an organizational standpoint. And then from there, I don't know, I feel like a glass of wine helps for me. And, no, I'm just joking, but yeah, it does. But yeah, and then from there, just being introspective, kind of responding to to either myself or to what I'm feeling, if that makes sense. Like sometimes I think it's okay to cross out a word. I was nervous of that before. I'm like, well, I'm going to use the wrong word here, and then I just get that writer's block. But I think just trusting the process from yourself and being okay to cross out a word and rethink about it is okay.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, all three of you. They were really beautiful presentations. And Stacey, you're back. Welcome back. I think we're going to end this session now so that we can, oh, hang on. Is this our longer session?
It is. Yeah, it is. So we could keep going for a moment. First of all, I apologize. My sincere apologies, Jessie, for swapping out right in the middle. I was trying to juggle a couple of things, and Amanda, I'm sorry that that I missed your presentation, but I will be able to see it on the recording, so that's really good. And I've got just a tiny bit of housekeeping. I know that our friends in the States are probably ready for their wine, their glass of wine in bed. But for those of you who can hang around with us, and forgive me if everybody's already seen this, I just want to make sure and get the word out. Our keynotes this evening, so I'm talking about Melbourne time here, are going to happen at 7 p.m. And they're it's being presented on YouTube. So the idea is, rather than gather in Zoom and then pop out to the YouTube, because it's on a timer and we might miss the beginning. So David and Katrina have asked us to just zoom right over to the YouTube at 7 and have a look at the keynote. We will pop back into Zoom number 1 for a Q&A after that. And then they've got a special treat for us. And at 8:15, we can pop back into the YouTube with a different link to see. They've worked their filmmaking and music magic wonders with some of the CAE folk. And so they've put together a short, I think it's 3 minutes and 30 seconds video. So they wanted to be sure that we were aware of the timing, so we wouldn't miss that on the YouTube, because it's set to start at 8:15 and it'll play. So if you blink, we might miss it. And that's up on the Facebook page as well. But if you're around, please don't miss that. They're just so wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to it. Great.
Will those links, I can't make it tonight, unfortunately, but will those links continue to be live over the weekend?
I think so, Anne, but I need to ask, it's sleepy time still there, and I need to ask Katrina and David how we might access them afterward. I know they're going to premiere, but if they're not available through those links, oh, that looks like a funny link there. Nope, I guess that's right. The period's in the, I'm just looking at it. We'll get another good link, and just like the session videos, we'll make sure that people have links to the Vimeo channel and then to the YouTube channel, so they'll be able to see those at another time. I know what you're saying, and our US friends are not going to be awake at 2 a.m. for this. I mean, you might, and I'll just say, you'll just have a little pretend experience of being Australian and living in COVID, where we've been on online conferences mostly in the middle of the night for the last 18 months. It's kind of fun and kind of weird, Carrie, isn't it? You can wear whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can wear your jammies if you like. I was just going to say about YouTube, because I had to work out YouTube for my ceremony for examination. Yeah. You can actually upload it onto YouTube and you can unpublish it. If you unpublish it, then you can send the link and other people can't find it. Yeah. But if you unpublish, send the link, then it should be there as long as, it's left unpublished. Took me a while to figure this out, because I'm not the most technical person in the world, I'm telling you.
Great. That's good to know. And I'm sure Katrina and David will give us the plan for a post today, so that we'll be able to have a look at it. So yeah, I'm looking forward. Thanks everyone. Gosh, it was just beautiful work, and it's so great. Thank you for being first time presenters at the conference. I hope that we've made a warm audience for you. Gosh, it's so great to see you along too, Ingrid. We've got poets gathered together, which makes my heart sing. So get out, stretch your legs, or have a lie down because it's nighttime. And then we will be back together at 4 p.m. Melbourne time for the UK, Australia, New Zealand version of the conference. Thank you so much. And thank you, Julia, for pinch hitting for me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it was lovely to come in and hear the final presentation.
Yeah, Julia's a gem. So thank you. You got to get some Julia love as well. All right, everybody. Take care.
See you soon.
See you.
Bye.